Hi, welcome to the virtual preview of Unit 1 for 5th grade reading. My name is Anna Wright. I'm the reading CTL this year. If you taught 5th grade in Uplift last year, we've already met. I was the Writing and Humanities CTL. If you're new to Uplift or new to 5th grade, welcome. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person at Collaboration Day kickoff in a couple weeks. My email is right here on the first slide, awright@uplift, and I'll have it again at the end too. So I did want to introduce myself just in case we haven't met. As I said, my name is Anna Wright. I teach at Peak. I'm finishing up my master's at SMU in reading and writing and really focusing on intervention for struggling readers and kids with dyslexia. So that's a huge passion of mine, is working with kids who are having trouble. I'm going into my 6th year of teaching. I have a dog and a cat. I love them a lot. And a fun fact about me is that I perform comedy a couple nights a week at the Dallas Comedy House. That's me right there. But I promise to keep the jokes to a minimum. So we're going to jump right in and get started. This is probably the first unit preview that you've watched. It's the first one that I've created. So I wanted to go quickly over our goals for the next 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to start going super high level through Unit 1, looking at the scope and sequence and unit at a glance. Then I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the unit at a glance, talk about a couple concepts that are really important, foundations, and also that are tough for kids on the STAR. We'll look a little bit at an annotated lesson plan, and then I'm going to show you a couple resources that I lean on really heavily in planning and that I hope will make your life a lot easier this year as well. So let's get started. To find the scope and sequence, you can go on Blackboard. In the 5th grade page, there's a sidebar that says Scope and Sequences. Click on that, download reading, and you'll get a document that looks like this. This first page just talks about different content connections to the PYP unit. But where it gets really good and really meaty, and what I really want to talk about with you, is the readiness teaks and this vertical alignment that's on the second page. So you can see in bold are the readiness teaks. Those are the teaks that are tested really heavily in 5th grade and that are really foundational as they move into secondary literacy. And you can also see the corresponding teaks for 4th grade and 6th grade. One thing you'll notice as you read through these is that the teaks stay pretty consistent from year to year in reading, unlike in math or science where the content changes. Some years, literally the verbiage is identical from year to year. Look at 4th, 5th, and 6th grade 2A are all identical. So that's good news for us in a lot of ways because there isn't much that kids are going to learn in 5th grade that they're learning about for the first time. Now, they're reading more complex texts, and they're often applying these skills with more nuance, but the basic vocabulary and concepts are generally pretty familiar to them. Another thing I want to point out on this first page are some resources that'll be on the right-hand column. There's a list of texts that you can use to teach through, and I just want to do a quick plug. If you haven't chosen your first novel study or read aloud, Wonder by R.J. Palacio is a great one. It's a really engaging book. It's at a good level for kids. It's really great for teaching about character and point of view, and it has a really good socio-emotional message. So it's a really good way to set the tone for the year, both in terms of engaging reading and also social-emotional learning. So as you keep scrolling through the scope and sequence, you'll see a table that has all the standards we're teaching in this unit. And then there's another table that has the TEKS breakdown, and this thing is awesome. So you have the really dense TEK verbiage on the left-hand side, and then the next column unpacks it and actually operationalizes what this thing means. Next column has different examples of assessment that you can use for the TEK. So that includes some question stems from a couple different resources, questions off of common assessments, and STAR questions. If there's one thing that I hope you walk away from this unit preview understanding, it's that we really want to make sure that we're grounded in what kids are expected to know and do. Use the scope and sequence, really look at what they're expected to produce at the end of the unit so that you have a really clear vision of where you're going in class and you can make sure that your questioning is leading kids where they need to be. And then the last column has additional helpful information. So now we're going to dive into the unit at a glance, which takes a scope and sequence, and that's just a list of content that we'll teach, and it actually creates a schedule with pacing and order of standards. So that's also on Blackboard, same folder where you downloaded this unit preview. You'll just download Unit 1, Unit at a Glance, and then you'll see a table that looks like this. I wanted to kind of talk about this first row with you guys. You'll notice the pacing says ongoing, and then it's all of the vocabulary standards. That's because you should probably have like a 20-minute word study chunk every day where you're hitting this TEK. So I have a couple days where you teach, for example, context clues or dictionary skills, but it's really something that should be done in small chunks throughout the day, especially for the kids that we teach at a lot of our schools in the district. Vocabulary is a really major deficit for them. So I want to make sure that that's on your mind. I have a lot of resources for teaching vocabulary and setting up those word study systems that we can talk about at Collaboration Day, and that you can also find on Blackboard in the resources folder. So when you scroll down, then you start getting into the regular pacing. So you can see it has the number of days to teach, standard, a couple objectives, potential misconceptions, and then an assessment. A lot of the stuff that we teach in Unit 1 are really strategies that kids should be applying every time they read. So I might have us teaching it for a day or two, but again, it's something that can apply across the board. So I've noted in those cases when it's a reading strategy that should be pulled across the board. Another thing you're going to notice a lot of times in these assessment columns is that I don't use multiple choice questions or passages. That's because I think that stuff should really be saved for STAR Prep. So it's often just one or two quick questions. I'll often use the question stems from Release STAR tests. And I try to keep the questions as general as possible so that you can apply them to whatever text you're reading with your kids. A few standards that are pretty tough for kids that I wanted to make sure were on your radar. Context clues is probably the lowest, well, it's definitely the lowest of the vocabulary standards for our kids. It's also the one that's most tested on STAR, so we want to make sure that kids are really in the habit of thinking about, like, not just what words mean, but how they figured it out, like being metacognitive about it. So I have us teaching it for a day, but you should really be in the habit of asking them, like, across content areas, like, what this word means and how they figured it out. So, like, if they're, doing their Go math and there's a word that's unknown, you can still talk through it there. Another one I wanted to talk about with y'all is plot. 5.6a was the lowest standard for Uplift as a district on the 2017 STAR. That being said, it was only one question, so don't feel the need to hit it too hard or panic, but we do want to make sure that we're teaching it correctly. One thing I wanted to highlight is that plot in 5th grade is really talking about the connection between events in a novel or a story. It's not so much about identifying the exposition or the rising action or the climax. So as you talk about and teach plot, make sure you're really talking about the connections and how one event gives rise to another. I also just included some question stems here that I just pulled from Release STAR tests. These are specifically related to Wonder, but you can use them for any text and just plug in the names of their characters. And I'll show you in just a second where I get those Release STAR tests from. Last one I want to talk about with y'all is summary. In Unit 1, we don't hit summary super hard. In Unit 2, we really get into it with nonfiction text. But this will give us some time to prime the pump with kids and get them in the habit of doing things that they need to do to successfully find a summary. So one of the big stumbling blocks for kids is choosing which details are most important to include in a summary and what are shiny details or distractors that can be left out. So again, I have here in the assessment to have kids in the habit of thinking two things. Who or what was this text mostly about? And what's the most important information about the topic? And doing that will help them get in the habit of determining significance. And again, that's something that's transferable in reading, science, humanities, a little bit less in math because we read less, but you can still make it work. So I want to talk quickly about an annotated model lesson with y'all. They are up on Blackboard. There are 5 up right now. There will be 10 by the end of the year. This annotated model lesson is the one about making inferences. So you can go through and read this on your own, but I did want to just kind of talk about the structure of the AML itself and then also how the lesson is structured. So you have the actual lesson on the left-hand side, and then these comments are just my thought process for how I worked it out. So I'll talk about like why I chose a specific activity and also the resources that I pulled. Because like don't reinvent the wheel. There's so much good stuff out there. Like use that stuff as wisely as you can and as much as you can. You'll also notice the structure of this reading is before, during, and after reading. I don't spend a lot of time on like the specific comprehension skill. Like in this case, it's making inferences. The reason why we don't do that stuff like a graphic organizer is that that's a really helpful scaffold for struggling readers. But for readers who are on grade level, they're generally doing that already. And for us, like as adults, we make inferences automatically, and kids just need to be pushed to learn how to support those inferences. So things like it says, I say, and so, or like specifically activating schema is a great scaffold to use in tutoring. It's not necessary in whole group instruction. And we'll talk more about that kind of framework at Collaboration Day. Last thing I want you to notice is that we have that before, during, right there, during, and after reading structure. And I pull those activities from the instructional framework. So now we're going to transition and talk about some resources that you can use. The first one I want to talk about is the instructional framework. You can find that on Blackboard if you go to Course Vision and Supporting Documents, download the thing that says Literacy Instructional Framework, and this is the second page of it. And it literally has before, during, and after reading, and then a menu of activities that you can just plug and play for each of those chunks of your lesson. Another place where I pull activities for before, during, and after reading is from a website called Lead Forward. So if you go to this URL, Lead Forward, Resources, Instructional Tools, and then Instructional Strategies playlist, you get this gigantic PDF that's literally just a whole bunch of different things that you can do in your class. Not all of these work for reading. Some of them are more applicable to like science and math classes, but this is another resource of stuff that's like evidence-based, good structures, just to keep like variety and movement and discourse in your classroom. Another really great resource from Lead Forward are the Release STAR tests from the past 4 years. I think it goes back to 2013. So if you go Lead Forward Resources, scroll down to grade 5, Reading Release Test, it has all of these release questions broken down by standard. So I said earlier, if you remember one thing, it's to really ground yourself in like what kids are going to be expected to do. And this is a really helpful way to make sure that your instruction is aligned. So even though we're teaching through novels and short stories and like really rich text, making sure that you're asking kids questions, like using the verbiage and to the like level of rigor that they're going to be expected to do on STAR. So this is like the most important thing to do before you teach any lesson. Finally, there are more resources on Blackboard in the resource bank. I have stuff broken down just by each of the different strands of literacy. And then the Teacher Knowledge has a lot of good background stuff, book recommendations, blogs, things that have really helped me sort of develop my vision of literacy, and also just tools that I use in my classroom. So thank you so much for watching this preview. If you have any questions, please, please, please be in touch with me. I'm back at work full-time on July 31st, but I'll be checking periodically the week of the 24th. So just reach out with any question, and I'll get back in touch with you as soon as possible. Again, thanks for watching. I look forward to seeing you at Collaboration Day. Or if you're watching this after Collaboration Day, I had a great time seeing you.